So in the last part of, this is the last lecture of the quarter, we're going to talk about spatial cognition, which is closely related to communication. So basically we're going to talk about unilateral neglect and anosognosia. I cannot pronounce that. I need to work on that. So let's work on it. See, I get crazy at the end of the quarter too. It's not just you. So with spatial perception, the right parietal lobe spatial coordinate system is essential for constructing an image of one's own body and environment, and for planning movements. The right hemisphere parietal association cortex comprehends spatial relationships and provides schemas of the body in relation to its surroundings, and the external world. The body schema, also known as the body image, is a mental representation of how the body is anatomically arranged. So, a disorder of that area causes neglect, which is the tendency to behave as if one side of the body or one side of space does not exist. It usually affects the left side of the body and the left side of space because it's located in the right cerebral cortex. Neglect can often be misinterpreted by others as confusion or lack of cooperation, but it's actually really, to that person, that side of the body or space doesn't exist. So these are some drawings that people with neglect have drawn. And the top one is, the doctor had this picture and the person needs to reproduce it, and this is their drawing. So there's a lot of stuff missing on the left side, particularly that room K is way out of joint there. And the bottom picture is the person's asked to draw a clock, put in the numbers, and set the hands to a specific time. And all the numbers are on the right side. Pretty interesting. And so the person is not aware of the left side of space. The other things that you can see with neglect is people don't eat stuff on the left side of their plate. They bump into stuff on the left side as they're walking. Personal neglect can include things like unilateral lack of awareness of sensory stimuli, so they don't feel that their hand is dragging along as they're going, or unilateral lack of personal hygiene and grooming, so they comb one side of their hair and don't comb the other, or unilateral lack of movement of the limbs. So personal neglect results from failure to direct attention. It's also called hemi-inattention. So I'm going to try to say this again. Anosognosia, that's what it is. Anosognosia is a form of denial that occurs in some people with severe hemiparesis and personal neglect. The lesion is often in the right anterior insula, which is an area that's devoted to the representation of self and distinguishing between self and others. So they look down and see their hemiparetic hand, and they don't identify it as part of themselves. So really kind of interesting. So spatial neglect, as opposed to personal neglect, is characterized by a lack of understanding of spatial relationships, and it results from a deranged internal representation of space. So manifestations of spatial neglect include problems with navigation, like trail finding in the building or anything, construction, kind of assembling things, or dressing. People with spatial neglect may have difficulty finding their way even within a single room. So you can get lost in one room. Decreased comprehension of spatial relationships also causes two different types of apraxia. Remember, which is that difficulty with performing sequences of movements. So dressing apraxia is difficulty with dressing due to the inability to correctly orient the clothing to the body. So if you just hand somebody a coat and say, put it on, they can't get it oriented correctly to get the left arm in the left sleeve and the right arm in the right sleeve. They just have the inability to do that. So they need assistance. Construction apraxia is that difficulty with drawing, building, and assembling objects. So the drawings that we looked at a couple slides back result from construction apraxia. Neglect is a complex phenomenon with different presentations and diverse causes. So it's not a specific area of the brain necessarily, even though it's usually the right hemisphere. But it's difficult for the patient and for their caregivers. So neglect is more severe and more persistent following right hemisphere damage, and it affects 45% of people with severe traumatic brain injury. Persistent neglect is a predictor of increased requirements for assistance and more likely skilled nursing placement instead of being able to stay at home. So it's pretty important that it's recognized in people, because people that have persistent neglect have difficulty taking care of themselves. They need more assistance. So really just sort of a summary of cerebral hemispheric function. The frontal lobes control motor function, activity initiation, planning of nonverbal communication, goal-oriented behavior, judgment, interpretation of emotion, attention, flexibility in problem solving, so that's that divergent thinking, social behavior, and motivation. Parietal lobes process somatosensation, direct attention, and provide perceptual schemas that relate to the parts of the body relative to the environment and the world. Occipital lobes process vision, including spatial relationships of visual objects, analyze motion and color, and control visual fixation. Temporal lobes process auditory information, classify sounds, and process emotions and memory. Cerebral function is diverse and adaptable. So when we talk about functional reorganization of the cerebral cortex, it means that areas of the cortex can take over function of damaged areas. Cerebral dysfunction can be devastating and life-changing.